Okay, I guess we can get started. I just want to, before we start, I just want to mention that we have quite a few things coming up on the schedule that you all can take a look at. On Thursday, of course, have the DAO meeting, and we also have little Twitter Spaces at just at 7 o'clock Eastern. So come to that. Then we have the class, the weekly DAO meeting, and then I also just save the date, February 26th for the Beans poker tournament. We're firming that date up, and that should be a very fun event. So just looking forward to that. And yeah, I think as far as an overall update, I think there's too much going on for me to give a quick update on what's going on. I think we'll probably just go straight to class. And then if you're interested, there was just a weekly update that Publius pushed out on Discord, and come to the DAO meeting, and we can chat then. Unless Publius, is there anything on your mind before we get started?
Nothing in particular.
Okay, so class is open. Feel free to post your questions on the class discussion board here. This is being recorded, so we'll have the recording of this afterwards and some notes. And you can feel free to raise your hand as well, or just come up on stage. It's open for people to just come right up on stage. I think, Uvis, I think I saw your hand up right as I joined. So if you have a question, and if anyone else has a question, the floor is open. Mod.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. We'll go Mod and then we'll go JW.
Yeah, I'll start with a question. Right now, when the price is above 1 and we're minting, I understand that we're still issuing soil. Does it make sense, or is it a good idea to stop issuing soil when we're above 1 and minting when the debt is high? So we only do that when we're within like a certain level of debt, but when it's too high, then there is no need to keep issuing more debt even if we're above peg.
So, in particular, issuing too much soil when above peg is the issue Beanstalk had when it was growing last November. So, in short, through BIP 6 and BIP 9, there are now changes to the soil rules, which we believe balance the needs of the system with which Beanstalk requires there to be some soil issued every season because the peg maintenance model changes the weather based on the TWAP, the pod rate, and the demand for soil, specifically the changing demand for soil over the previous 2 seasons. There needs to be some soil in order for Beanstalk to measure demand for soil. However, in the previous growth cycle, Beanstalk had a minimum soil parameter that was a function of the total supply, and accordingly, there was just way too much soil issued every season, even when Beanstalk was minting and paying off debt. So the new soil parameters that is currently in place is anytime there's a time-weighted average excess of beans in the pool, the amount of soil is equivalent to the time-weighted average excess over the previous season, which has been the case for the past couple weeks, what you've seen in place. And now the price is oscillating above and below $1. So when the price is below $1 for a season, or the TWAP is below $1 for a season, that the soil minted is based on the time-weighted average excess of beans in the pool. The new rule, which you're asking about, when there's a time-weighted average shortage of beans in the previous season and Beanstalk is minting, is that if at the start of a season Beanstalk pays off 50,000 pods, let's call it, during that season, the most amount of pods Beanstalk will be willing to issue is 50,000 pods total. So assuming that there's demand for all the soil Beanstalk is issuing, in that case, the pod rate will decrease over the course of that season because the bean supply has increased while the debt level has stayed the same. The pod line has stayed the same. So the pod rate, or the debt level in that case, should have decreased because the pod line has stayed the same while the supply has increased. So under the new parameters, when Beanstalk is growing, the debt level should decrease even if the length of the pod line stays the same, if that makes sense. Now, go ahead.
I think I lost you at the bit of if we're minting 50,000 and then we issue a soil of 50,000, what happens again to the supply and to the pod rate?
So let's say 50,000 pods harvest at the start of this season. The amount of soil Beanstalk will issue at the start of the season as well is a function of the 50,000 pods that just harvested and the weather during the season. So the amount of soil Beanstalk issues is the solution to the equation. How much soil can Beanstalk issue such that the amount of pods issued during the season is the maximum pods issued during the season is the same as the pods that were harvestable at the start of the season. So if 50,000 pods harvested at the start of the season, the most amount of pods that will be issued during the season is 50,000 pods.
Okay, is this one way to think of it then is that, okay, we have an excess supply of 50,000, so let's take it out by issuing soil? Is this one way to think of it?
Well, we have to separate the two sides, right? When the price is too low, when the price is below $1, that means that there was a time-weighted average excess of beans in the pool over the previous season. So when there's an excess of beans in the pool over the previous season, Beanstalk needs to remove beans from the system. So when the price is too low, let's say there was a time-weighted average excess of beans across the Uniswap pool, the Curve pool, any pools that beans are in. In a theoretical world, Beanstalk should issue the amount of soil to match that time-weighted average excess, if that makes sense. So if there is demand for soil, someone is going to buy those beans from the market and return the price to $1, if that makes sense. So from an efficiency perspective, the maximum pods Beanstalk will issue when there's a time-weighted average excess of beans in the pool over the previous season is the amount of based on the amount of soil necessary to return the price to $1 by removing the exact amount of time-weighted average excess beans from the pool. That's a totally different rule set, though, than when there's a time-weighted average shortage of beans in the pool when the price is too high. And that has to do with then how many pods harvested at the start of the season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Publius.
JWW, go ahead.
Yeah, so Publius, I think I'm getting more and more excited about the idea of stock and seeds in general. And I was just wondering two things. One, when it's in place that we're able to buy and sell stock and seeds, what would be an incentive for somebody to actually sell their seeds and or stock versus holding it? Because I don't, obviously then their deposits in the silo wouldn't be yield generating. So I'm interested to know like what would be in it. Obviously that could vary, but to get your thoughts on what an incentive for that would be. And then also I was just curious about the choice to have the yield generation be 10,000th stock per season per seed. If you could just talk on those two, that'd be great.
So to speculate a little bit on uses, I think the most interesting beyond people, like the most obvious one is people are able to more customize their risk profile associated with Beanstalk. Some people may prefer more stock versus seeds and vice versa. And if you think of stock as more based on the short-term growth of Beanstalk and seeds as because they yield more stock over time, more long-term yield from Beanstalk, people can customize their exposure to Beanstalk, if that makes sense. And given the opportunity cost introduced by the stock system and the requirement to forfeit your grown stock, people may be incentivized to sell some of their stock as opposed to cashing out from the silo entirely. So that's the most obvious use case. But then there's also the idea of like lending markets on top of stock and seeds because they're yield bearing assets. And then once you have that, there's kind of the ability to short the future of Beanstalk. So lots of really interesting market complexities are introduced by stock and seeds, which is really fun. So when we talk about the growth and the development of the ecosystem, stock and seeds becoming liquid will open up a ton of different integrations and market primitives, let's call it, that will greatly benefit the liquidity and sophistication of the ecosystem, which is, we're excited. And once the silo is upgraded to support arbitrary tokens, that'll kind of be one of the next developments immediately in the pipeline. And to speak substantively about where the 1 to 10, 1/10,000th of a stock grows from one seed every season. In short, we did a little bit of rough, we're big fans of napkin math, and there's no right answer per se as to what exactly the right amount of incentive you need from stock that's going to grow from seeds. And on the one hand, I think as opposed to what the rate of growth is per se, which is less important, the real decision was to make the growth linear, if that makes sense. And so the opportunity cost increases in a linear fashion the longer that an asset is deposited in the silo. And I think I'm not going to make up like some convoluted logic as to why we chose 1/10,000, but in reality, what we actually chose was 2 seeds and 4 seeds per bean denominated value deposited. So it's not actually even like 1/10,000th if you think about it from a bean perspective. That was just from a coding perspective something that was cleaner to implement. It was more figuring out what is on a bean denominated value, the amount of stock and seeds that you want to issue. And in general, I think we're inclined to move towards more of a gauge system that will allow for more fluctuation between different pools. The idea would be to have some sort of hard-coded stock and seed ratio for the Beanstalk seed pool as compared to beans to ensure that stock and seeds don't overinflate. But beyond that, basically every LP pool, more or less, maybe with the exception of the Beneath Uniswap V2 pool, which is sort of a core to the protocol in many ways, should all be up to the gauge system we're thinking about how it's best to design at the moment. So don't have like a really sophisticated answer for you as to where the 10,000 comes from, or the 1 in 10,000, but it's more about on a bean denominated value how much extra stock to reward over time.
Got it. Great. That helps. Thanks. And then I've got a question about valuing debt, but I'll ask that after everybody else. So thank you.
Okay. How about Divine Jesus?
Hey, Publius. My question is on Bean itself and what catalyst is going to make Bean more widely used in the near future. And I have one more question.
So there's a variety of different both protocol upgrades and more general integrations happening, hopefully to the Bean token in the near future that will be complementary. So to speak a little bit on the Beanstalk upgrades first, the goal is, in addition to the launch of the farmers market, the pod marketplace, in the next week or so, we hope, our intention is to propose that BIP in the next 24 hours, let's call it, maybe 48 hours at the max. So then from there, it'll be up to a week until that's live, hopefully, but maybe it'll even reach a super majority, who knows. And beyond that, the next kind of upgrades in the pipeline are to upgrade the silo to accept arbitrary tokens based on a whitelist. So that will include the Bean3 curve pool, and then potentially a variety of other pools like a Bean Frax pool that Bean Sprout and Frax are talking about coordinating, and a Bean LUSD pool as well, potentially. So there's a couple different immediate things in the pipeline. There was also that AFRA thing. I'm not sure of the current status of that, but Bean Sprout was also working with AFRA to launch a decentralized 3 pool with Bean. And so all of those tokens, and this is where we said it was complementary, the integrations with the Beanstalk upgrades, the idea that the silo will accept arbitrary LP tokens will allow direct integrations with some or all of these LP pools into the silo based on BIPs, which is pretty exciting. So beyond that, another upgrade to Beanstalk happening in the near future will be that the Bean farm will be generalized. So currently you can kind of go from the field to the silo. If you have harvestable pods, you can deposit them in the silo, or if you have claimable beans, you can sow them or redeposit them in the silo without any of those assets, those beans touching your wallet, which for some participants in the ecosystem, it seems is more beneficial from a tax perspective. We've been, some of our community members have highlighted that. And so the idea is that we're going to generalize the bean farm to sort of accept arbitrary wrapped assets that you can hold on the bean farm, and then either turn into beans or LP tokens and silo or sow to your heart's content, but don't necessarily ever need to remove them from the farm. So when we talk about just increasing utility and decreasing friction to integrating with the ecosystem, we think upgrading the silo and generalizing the bean farm are going to be pretty big deals on that front. And then obviously there's the active coordination with various other protocols to get Bean in front of them and have them consider it. And then maybe one other thing just to highlight would be Creator DAO. They're pretty cool in our opinion, and they're interested in holding beans in their treasury and also doing marketing for Bean kind of as a symbiotic win-win. So I think there's a lot of really cool things in the pipeline on the utility front and the adoption front. Liquidity is probably step one on that front, and they're all correlated, as you can tell. So integrating the LP tokens into the silo will help increase liquidity, which will help increase the ability to integrate with other protocols. So this is all going to hopefully happen in the next couple weeks and months, but step by step by step.
All right, thank you. You answered my second question, so I'm good.
I think that's a good thing.
Yes.
Hashrash?
Maybe an indication we talk too much, but perhaps just that we cover everything.
Thank you.
Okay, Hashrash, go ahead.
Hey, Publius, what's up? So my question is, now that the soil is scarce, basically, anybody that wants soil, they have to wait. How do we think about requiring people to be in the silo in order to be eligible for soil, with maybe a first in, first out system where a line would form with people that are siloing to get the soil when it's available?
So specifically, soil is designed to create new demand for beans because Beanstalk has to remove excess beans from the pool, and beans that are in the silo are sort of useless from that perspective. And so that's why there's a deliberate bifurcation between siloed beans and circulating beans, and you cannot sow silo beans. And so it would not make sense to offer any ability to sow silo beans independent of some sort of bonus for that as well.
Got it. Thank you.
But to jump on that, Hashrash and Publius, would there be a way where, like, you had to sow a portion and keep them sow, like, just to jump on your idea, Hashrash, say you had to sow 1,000 beans in order, you had to silo 1,000 beans for a certain period of time, and then you wouldn't be sowing, you'd have to withdraw those. You would get some sort of chit, which would then enable you to, is this sort of what you're talking about, Hashrash? Like not to sow siloed beans, but to qualify to sow other beans.
Right. I'm just thinking that, if people may be waiting for, soil to be available so they can lend to the protocol. But
the goal is to create an efficient market for soil. Like the name of the game to keep Beanstalk, the peg maintenance model working is efficient market for soil. And as soon as you impose like arbitrary rules, like you need to own stock to sow, that makes the soil market less efficient. So ultimately, I think there's real benefit to keeping the silo in the field basically entirely independent.
Okay. All right, thank you,
that makes
Publius.
sense.
Yep.
So, Publius, to expand on that, you would think that would, if the less efficient it is, then the higher probably, that would just end up driving.
If I want to sow a million soil right now, and I need to now buy 100,000 beans and deposit them in the silo, that is a friction that's introduced in order to actually sow the beans, if that makes sense. So the goal is to not do anything of the sort and to make the market for soil as efficient as possible, like as a principle.
Right.
Publius, this is more or less the same as taking deposits, right? Which is creating inorganic demand.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I missed that.
The inefficiency you were describing here is kind of the same as when we said let's take deposits, for when soil is available, and you explained it then by creating inorganic demand. Yeah.
Exactly. Like just to fill people in, there was an idea circulating that people could bid in advance on soil, sort of to fill in the soil once it exists. But the problem is that just creates more demand during a time where Beanstalk doesn't need any extra demand. So when the price is above 1, people should really only be buying beans to silo them for long-term siloing or to use them for something. If you're buying them below $1, that should be to sow them in the field, more or less, not to overprescribe behavior. You can buy below $1 and silo just as well. But from an incentive perspective, that's the behavior Beanstalk more or less tries to create.
Go ahead, JWW, and then we'll get to Divine Jesus.
Yeah, so Publius, when thinking about the pod marketplace, I guess I've been trying to understand like how the debt would be valued when the marketplace goes live, and maybe my thinking is like, I think you can just kind of poke holes or tear this apart, but my thinking is the closer to PEG or the closer to 1 that we're starting to see the sales of the pod marketplace, like let's say we're looking at somebody who's like 400 million in line. If people are starting to value those pods kind of closer to $1, I mean, does that generally infer that there's trust behind Beanstalk, as opposed to people that are just trying to buy it for 10 cents at 400 million in line? Is that fair to say?
Certainly. So, I mean, the question of like how do you price a pod is incredibly sophisticated, and probably a conversation or a discussion for another day. But in short, I think the given that a bean or a pod at a given place in line is sort of you can figure out exactly when you're, based on a future market cap or a future supply of beans, you're going to get that pod liquid into a bean. There is some sort of direct, from a discounting value in the future to the present. An increase in a value of a given pod in a place in line would be an indication that someone is more bullish on Beanstalk's ability to increase in supply as compared to if the price were lower. So I think the pod marketplace will serve as a large data point or a series of data points that will provide a series of data points that will help everyone start to participate in Beanstalk in a more efficient capacity, hopefully.
Okay, great. And then if that's the case, like let's say that the debt gets valued at quite close to peg or quite high, is there what mechanism is in place, or is there a mechanism in place, or would that be changed at all to increase the amount of debt that Beanstalk is willing to issue, or would that stay kind of currently with the way that it's sort of set up now?
Yeah, so the soil mechanism, which is the willingness to issue debt, is going to be totally independent of secondary prices on the farmer's market. The weather may go up or down, as sort of a second order effect of increased demand for pods or a decrease in demand for pods based on people's future expected minting, or as that's implied in the pod marketplace. But beyond that, no.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Divine Jesus and then Syncubate. Divine Jesus, we can't hear you if you're speaking. We'll take Syncubate and then we'll circle back for you, Divine Jesus.
Hey, Don, do you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you good. Loud and clear.
Okay, good deal. So I went ahead and shared in the class discussion a tweet that I thought was interesting. From the other day, I saw Zeus from Olympus. He tweeted, "Liquidity is a public good." And I thought that was interesting, given everything that's going on right now with the critiques of protocol and liquidity. Is this something that we could potentially consider for Beanstalk? I had wrote about this a few weeks ago, and kind of building off of what Publius was talking about in terms of stock and seed and potentially interesting financial derivatives. The idea of protocol and like the idea of liquidity as a public good is really interesting to me. Interesting that Zeus is also now thinking about it. I wonder if he's rethinking the whole POL model. So my thought process was,
could you maybe expand on liquidity as a public good?
Sure, yeah.
I'm not sure I follow what that means.
Sure. So the whole idea behind it, Publius, is kind of like what you were talking about earlier when I believe JWW had asked you about the thought process in terms of how seeds generate new stock. And you were talking about it was pretty much just napkin math. Right now in the silo already favors LP deposits over bean-only deposits. Seems like it's an arbitrary favor in terms of the amount of seed you get. It's double the amount of seed if you do an LP deposit versus a bean-only deposit. In either case, they're withdrawable deposits. And it's when the seed and stock become liquid, it's already based off of the class discussions we had so far. My understanding is if a user were to withdraw their seed and stock from the silo when they become liquid, their deposit is essentially locked in the silo until they return that stock and seed or repurchase it and return it back to the silo. So there's already like an implicit possibility that deposits can become locked if a depositor does not return their stock and seed if they decided to sell it on the open market and not buy it back and return it back to the silo. My thought process was what if we had an explicit like two-tier type of deposit system where there would be, as we have now, bean only and LP deposits that are withdrawable, and separate from that, bean only and LP deposits that are locked. But these locked deposits would be represented as NFTs, number one, and number two, to support them or to incentivize users to do a locked deposit, there would maybe be slightly more stock up front or slightly more seed up front, similar to kind of like how we're already doing that with LP versus Bean only deposits. But the catch is the stock and seed associated with a locked deposit would also be locked. Now, because it's represented as an NFT, it would be, it really presents some interesting opportunities from what users can then do with that representation of their liquidity position. Because even though the liquidity is provided essentially as a public good, right? Because what a user is doing is saying, I support Beanstalk. I'm willing to commit this Bean or this LP deposit indefinitely to support this decentralized stablecoin that hopefully will span all of DeFi one day. But it's not really locked, right? Because it's locked with for the protocol's benefit in the sense that it's providing a kind of baseline continuum of liquidity for Beanstalk. But from a user's perspective, it's actually not locked, right? Because the protocol would be issuing an NFT that would represent that position. And then the NFT itself could then be used, right? Because it has the underlying value. The underlying values.
I still don't understand what liquidity as a public good is. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Right. So it was based off of a paper I had read, or I didn't read it all because it was really long, but it was a paper that was written in 2019 about the traditional finance system and lessons learned from the 2007-2008 financial crisis. It was regarding the idea of liquidity as a public good in the global financial markets. And obviously, from that perspective, it's more like, how can regulators and centralized entities like that are above all of traditional finance kind of step in as providing a baseline continuity of liquidity in financial markets, right? But in DeFi, we don't have that, right? We don't have like a centralized trusted party that could do that. In a sense, I thought about it like it's really the obligation is really upon users to commit capital, but we can do it in a way that's not self-limiting, right? So I was thinking about it from how Uniswap v3 does LP positions. They issue an NFT to you, and the NFT represents your liquidity position. And what's interesting is, and this was a problem when Uniswap v3 first launched, people thought, oh, I could just sell my NFT, right? But no, if you sell your NFT or you transfer it to another wallet, whoever owns that wallet owns your liquidity position because the NFT represents that LP position. So in the same sense, I was thinking, what if Beanstalk issued like an NFT to represent a locked deposit to users that are willing to do that? They're willing to lock liquidity in Beanstalk for maybe a little bit more stock and seed up front. But again, that stock and seed would be locked too. The only thing that would be claimable would be newly minted Bean from when the protocol mints Bean. So with the Uniswap v3 LP, you can go into Uniswap, you can claim your fees without touching the assets representing the LP position. So in the same sense, I was thinking this would essentially be a yield generating NFT that would represent an indefinite position in Beanstalk protocol. And then from a user's perspective, that NFT could then be, you could take it as, you could deposit as collateral and take a loan out against it. You could lend it out, right? Because it's yield generating. If there was like a public goods funding project built on top of Beanstalk one day, for example, let's say I like a certain charity or public good initiative, other users like it, we could stake our NFTs and then the yield from those NFTs could be directed towards that public goods funding idea. So there's just so many ways that this could kind of like build on top of the utility of Bean as a token, right? And I was thinking about it also from the pods marketplace perspective, like users would be able to unlock liquidity even though the underlying liquidity is locked because the NFT has value, it represents value. But the question is, how could we explore that? And because Zeus is thinking about it too, I thought maybe this whole I know you guys have kind of been like critiques of the PCV POL model, and it's interesting that somebody like Zeus is also just recently now saying liquidity is a public good. I'm wondering where his thought process is. So just curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot there, Syncubate, and I think there's some macro reasons why it may not make the most sense, and then some micro reasons as well. So I'll try to kind of break things down at a couple different levels here, because I really do love the thought and want to analyze it in full. So, at a high level, as you mentioned, we're really against POL or PCV, protocol owned liquidity or protocol controlled value, in basically any capacity. And why is that? It's because Beanstalk and faith in the peg maintenance model is very much a faith-based system, right? People have to believe in the model. When the price is below $1, it's people's belief in the model that both inspires someone to buy and sow beans and prevents people from withdrawing and selling all of their beans, for example. And so one of the first primary questions is, well, how do we create a system that is unlikely to be have everyone's faith shaken? And as soon as you introduce POL or PCV as sort of a first stop, right? There's some amount of POL which Beanstalk would then be able to use to return the price to the peg, or in some capacity influence the peg maintenance schedule, for example, in the ability for the POL or the PCV to be converted, if that makes sense, to peg. That immediately introduces some additional volatility around anytime you run out of that layer one peg defense, if that makes sense. And so at the highest level, the goal is to offer no, level one peg defenses, and to have the protocol only have one macro peg defense, which over time more and more and more people will start to believe in, and then they will start to participate in peg maintenance at a micro level, which will create a much more sustainable, consistent price at the peg. But the idea from a protocol design perspective is not to create sort of like a layer one defense in any capacity, because I think that will have a counterintuitive effect to what may be intended, or a counter effect to what was intended. And then to talk a little bit more about the concept of liquidity as a public good. Well, what is liquidity, right? Liquidity is the ability to sell one asset into another asset. And so on the one hand, that's very important. And there's real problems if an asset that you thought had liquidity into various other assets suddenly doesn't. That effectively compromises the entire value, or certainly the utility of that asset. So liquidity is fundamental. And we would just highlight that moving from a collateralized model to a credit-based model does give Beanstalk a leg up in its ability to provide an infinite amount of liquidity to various protocols based on demand for beans, which is great. But I'm still not sure exactly how liquidity as a public good would work in DeFi, given that currently, that's I'm just not, I don't want to comment more on that other than I still don't really understand it. Now, to think about, well, what would be the benefit to Beanstalk of having people lock up liquidity on a permanent basis, with the high level discussion of we don't even want a layer one defense? I would argue that there's no benefit whatsoever. And so we don't really want to offer additional stock and seeds. And so then you would say, well, maybe you can just offer people the ability to wrap their assets in an NFT anyways. And we would say that that's already going to exist, because deposit slips, they won't be an NFT. They will be an 1155, hopefully, so that there's some more liquidity and fungibility within a season at least. But the idea is that you'll be able to transfer deposit with or without the associated underlying stock and seeds. So you'll have a lot of those benefits. And then maybe at a micro level, when we talk about the utility, you mentioned the ability to lock up or use that NFT as collateral. On an apples to apples basis, it would be much better to use a liquid deposit that you can then liquidate the underlying stock, seeds, or beans at any point. Under that will certainly be able to get you more bang for your buck when using that liquid collateral as opposed to an illiquid asset as collateral. So I think while I'm certainly a big fan of how you're thinking about this, not necessarily sure that it makes sense for Beanstalk at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Also, just to add on to that a little bit. Number one, with the NFTs, like what's even more liquid than an NFT that holds stock and seeds? The actual stock and seeds. So not quite sure what the value is there by choosing to lock stock and seeds in an NFT and then making that liquid when we could just make the stock and seeds liquid. Like an NFT that holds stock and seeds is likely going to trade around the price of the value of the underlying stock and seeds. So why are the stock and seeds locked in the NFT? And then to, append on the POL conversation, we are interested in potentially having some sort of accompanying Beanstalk, DAO treasury protocol that, could receive bonds or accumulate protocol on liquidity and act as, some sort of benevolent actor in helping to maintain peg stability outside of the Beanstalk protocol.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that clarification. The only reason I was thinking the stock and seed might be locked too is because somebody had brought up when I originally thought about this is the arbitrage opportunity. If you were to favor locked deposits more than withdrawable deposits by giving them more stock and seed, there might be an arbitrage opportunity where the stock and seed could then be dumped on the market. But the other way to address that would just to not favor them with more stock and seed and just make the stock and seed withdrawable from the NFT, just like the minted bean would be. I was just thinking about this more on a bigger picture perspective. Like we think of liquidity providers in DeFi generally as mercenary. And I was thinking about it from the small percentage of users that might be more altruistic. And I don't know if that's where Zeus is coming from. Again, his tweet is kind of vague. I'm curious for those that follow Olympus, maybe how that develops, but maybe we can revisit this once the clarity is there. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Incubate. Okay, quickly, before Divine Jesus, I have a very quick question from Canadian Bennett, and that's Publius. You've spoken a bit about football. Who do you want to win the Super Bowl? And I would ask, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl?
Well, I think I'm not going to speak for both of us here. It's very hard to root against Joey B. So we'll be rooting for the Bengals, or I will be certainly. But the Rams defensive line against that Swiss cheese offensive line, very hard to pick against the Rams. So probably betting on the Rams if we were betting, which we won't be, but rooting for the Bengals.
All right. Awesome. Divine Jesus, you get your mic working? Not hearing anything yet. But we had you earlier, didn't we? Shoot. Feel free to stay up here and troubleshoot that. I'll check my DMs, see if anyone sent anything in. Class discussion, I see something up.
Manifold dropping beans on Joey B. I love it.
That would be positive carry bets if we worked out a little side website where we could just do some straight up bets. It'd be awesome.
Yeah. When can we transfer silo beans? That's when you can really have positive carry bets.
Mod.
Yeah, while we wait, Publius, I just wanted to expand on the forever deposit thing. Isn't a forever like a locked deposit that doesn't cannot be withdrawn is more stabilizing for Beanstalk? So why wouldn't Beanstalk favor someone who would lock their deposit versus someone who's having it in a silo and can take it out at any time? So why does
like,
that?
what does it mean for a bean to be locked in Beanstalk forever? Like, it doesn't really mean anything.
Doesn't it mean that you can't pull it out and put it in, sell it in the market or dump it in the market? Doesn't that make it as if like it's not in the supply anymore? But you're
Yeah,
still
but I think from at a high level, I don't think that you committing to lock that up forever will benefit Beanstalk other than it's like at the margin a removal of the supply. But the question is, like, when will that actually come into play? Because if the bean is already in the silo or going in the silo, at that point in time, it's not actually affecting Beanstalk. The time it's affecting Beanstalk is down the line when it might otherwise be removed from the silo. And I think from that perspective, like Beanstalk has the stock system and is confident in the stock system as like an incentive to keep assets deposited. And like there's not at the margin, it's very hard to know like, well, how much extra stock or seeds should Beanstalk pay to lock something up permanently? And I don't think that like it doesn't benefit Beanstalk to pay extra for something that theoretically might benefit it when the stock and seed system has demonstrated a very strong level of efficacy in retaining assets within the silo. So, it's not to say that there's no reason to do it, but I think at the margin, we're as Publius was saying, I think it's much more attractive to us to have independent protocols supporting Beanstalk peg maintenance in various ways, and you may have multiple competing DAOs that have their own POL or PCV that they're using to arbitrage Beanstalk, but that should really be separate from the protocol itself. Like from a principal perspective, the goal is to keep the model as simple as humanly possible. And obviously, it's getting more complex as we add arbitrary LP tokens to the silo and stuff like that. But even with that, the goal is to keep things as simple as possible.
Thank you, and I'm a big fan of the idea of offloading, these other things to other protocols. I like it more than doing it.
We think there's a lot of opportunity there for ambitious farmers to kind of get that going, and we would be happy to like help support that. But it really just can't come from the protocol. Like there has to be a separation of church and state between arbitrage supporting Beanstalk, like by independent market participants, and the protocol itself. So as long as those are separate, it's not to say that there can't be on-chain like arbitrage that is happening in an automatic fashion by various decentralized protocols. That would be awesome. But that's different than the protocol itself doing it.
Agreed. Thank you, Publius.
Okay, looks like Divine Jesus did end up typing the question out. My question was whether the rate of the yield that you get from a seed can change. If you could just speak to the deposited, I guess just a quick explainer on deposited LP and beans in the silo for Divine Jesus. That'd be helpful.
Well, I actually don't have a good answer because I think we're still not 100% sure on how we want to implement that more complex stock and seed system. However, the benefit of keeping seeds all yielding the same amount of stock is that then they're all fungible. As soon as you introduce like different classes of seeds, then you lose the liquidity there. So we'd probably, just from a design perspective, try to keep seeds yielding the same amount of stock per season, and then instead toggle the amount of seeds that you get per bean denominated value. But that is still in flux, so don't quote us on that.
Gotcha. Rex just posted, the locked value concept feels like what Convex is doing with Curve. A cool idea, but makes more sense to come from an outside group rather than Beanstalk Farms / Beansprout. Which just got me thinking that, yeah, it's, I have Convex, and it's kind of nice because it's sort of, there is a finality to it whenever you do one of these things that's permanent. And maybe that's for some of the groundswell from people thinking, they believe in Bean, they want and if there was a little bit extra, I understand the reasons to not do it, but there is some finality when you've done something like that that's permanent. You just think, all right, ride or die, I've done this. So I can see an argument for it, but I also see why it could be external. Anyway, Publius, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for someone to create that type of protocol where, then instead you receive some sort of fungible token that represents ownership in that DAO, and then that token is liquid, but then people can speculate on the future value of the DAO based on its ability to, profit from arbitraging the bean peg, for example. So a million different cool ways to go there. And our hope is to, inspire protocols like that to be built on top of Beanstalk in the not too distant future. And if people want to do that, we're happy to chat about ideas.
Okay, we are open for questions. Jarris James, hey, thanks for coming. Jarris was leading the AMA with Bankless. Was that just yesterday? I think it was yesterday. Got a hand. Come on up.
Hey, how you? Thanks for having me. Yeah, that AMA yesterday was awesome.
Yeah, so great. So glad you could do that. Thanks.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm looking to set up another AMA for Beanstalk in the near future with Bankless Africa.
Awesome. Yeah, that was really great.
Yeah. Bankless Africa, they're doing a project right now. It's just getting started though. They're scoping out a squad right now, but it's a whole project focused on stable coins, and it'll be great to have Publius give a breakdown of Beanstalk on there as well.
Amazing.
Cool. So yeah, we'll be in touch for that.
Yeah, it sounds good. Sounds good, man. Any question you have for Publius while we got you up here?
Let's see. I could save some for the AMA. Oh, what I would like to ask, he did mention something, another metaphor. I mean, there's tons of metaphors with Beanstalk, but it was one that that was new to me called a sprout. I would like to know more about sprout.
Sure, Publius.
So Bean Sprout is a Beanstalk accelerator program separate from Beanstalk Farms that was funded by the Beanstalk DAO as part of the Q1 budget. Mr. Manifold is the head of Beanstalk Farm, it's the head of Sprout. Maybe Mr. Manifold, you want to pop up here and just chat a little bit about what Bean Sprout is up to and how you think about supporting the Beanstalk ecosystem through Bean Sprout.
Sure, Publius. Jarris, thanks for hosting the getting our community exposure, and we're looking forward to working with you guys in the future for more things. So with Bean Sprout, as Publius mentioned, we're looking to build bean use cases and utility that kind of extend past what Beanstalk Farms is focused on. So one explicit example, and Dumpling, this kind of might also tie into one of the points you were making, is we are funding and incubating a concept called Afra Finance. And Afra is effectively going to be a long-term capital partner of Beanstalk that is arbitraging around Bean's peg, producing cash flows around the peg, and reinvesting those cash flows into basically pummeling more liquidity into them. And then this concept, Dumpling, kind of like the convex concept you mentioned, can be gained through exposure via Afra. So, there's more to come there. That's just one example. A couple other things we're thinking about on the marketing side. Some the Beans a poker tournament, which would but largely, the
Manifold. Mr. Manifold, your speaker seems like it's maybe covered up halfway or something. Just don't want to miss anything good that you're saying.
Is this better?
It was
Sorry.
for a second. Yeah, that I think now you're good. Yeah, and start back over at maybe the poker tournament and
Yeah. So largely, kind of the objective of Bean Sprout is to fund ecosystems that create long-term time-weighted sinks for bean demand. And that can happen through a variety of fashions. Again, mentioning Afra, something else we kind of have in the pipeline via Afra is enabling beans and maybe stalks and seeds as they become fungible ERC20s that are tradable to be collateral, or being able to borrow beans through various forms of collateral on Rari fuse pools. So really just, different ways to open up liquidity for the system, new demand and new utility for the system. So, we are kind of like a simp for Beanstalk, if that kind of analogy makes sense to you. But, there's a lot of really, really cool things that we can do with Beans.
Yeah, Beans got there's a lot of interesting things going on with this protocol. And so I'm very interested.
It's super, super exciting.
Yeah, this is cool. Beanstalk is I believe that y'all are gonna be the standard for the decentralized stablecoin. I love how you represent the ethos of crypto as well.
Thanks, Jairus. Yeah, that's great. There's definitely the more you look into it, and the more it's like the beans rabbit hole. There's just more to beans, more to beans than meets the eye. So
yeah, I see that. Even about Sunrise, that's new to me. I don't really understand Sunrise 100%. Yes, I would like to know more about that, and also about. I've read that in case of a dangerous vulnerability to Beanstalk, that the silo can pause or unpause Beanstalk. Exactly how does a pause on Beanstalk work?
I think this is for Publius.
Yeah, so the first is the Sunrise, is the function that is called by anybody at the top of every hour to start the next season. And the Sunrise function has to be called to start the season. So Beanstalk offers a reward in the form of beans, which increases every second that nobody calls the Sunrise function to incentivize prompt calling of the Sunrise function. So that's been called by someone at the top of every hour, more or less, for the past 6 months since we launched, and has been happening more or less automatically, independent of Publius, which is pretty cool, from basically as soon as we launched. Like, there was an MEV bot calling the Sunrise function, like, from the second season. So that's a little bit on the Sunrise function. The pause, all it really does is prevent the Sunrise function from being called. So it's actually a great back-to-back question you asked. Like, the definition of a pause is just that the Sunrise cannot be called until Beanstalk is unpaused. So it's not a full stop of the system, but it does, pause most of the system, in the sense that if you have beans that are in the silo, you can't withdraw them. If you have beans that are withdrawn but not claimable, they don't move up until there's another Sunrise called. And so BIPs, Beanstalk Improvement Proposals, do work on a time system, not a season-based system exclusively, to get around this. In case Beanstalk is paused, Beanstalk can still be upgraded. But the general concept of a pause is just that the Sunrise function can't be called, so seasons will not continue. So if there's a problem with the minting schedule, or whatever type of vulnerability, that's a way to temporarily stop Beanstalk from continuing to fuck up in whatever capacity it might be.
Yeah, I really respect how much thought was put behind this protocol. It's like no stone was left unturned here.
I mean, we appreciate that, but we would say that over the past 6 months, we have had the opportunity to fix multiple issues and inefficiencies with the model. So while it may appear to you that way today, we're certainly the beneficiaries of like Beanstalk being live for 6 months, so that we've had a large amount of data available to us to really improve the model overall. So glad that today it's starting to look that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to setting up some more AMAs for you. A lot more people need to know about Beanstalk for sure. When I first came across your project, I saw NF Thinker made a post about it within the educational channel in Bankless, and then once I started reading about it, and I saw a few YouTube videos, I definitely fell down that rabbit hole, like Dumpling was saying.
We agree, and candidly, we don't think we've done a very good job of making Beanstalk. In part, we don't really feel comfortable like acting as a salesperson. We don't really feel that's the role of Publius. So would greatly appreciate you facilitating those types of more organic AMAs and settings where we can talk about the protocol in a way that doesn't feel like shilling per se.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I will, I'm proud to promote you guys for sure. Cause I definitely believe in this project, and I like, the allegory behind it is interesting. It's like gamified in a way. And the way that it was inspired by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, like that was really cool. It was really cool. It's really deep.
Well, it's great to hear, new people hearing about it, and it's just great to have another farmer. Thanks, Jairus.
No problem. Yeah, I think Bankless Africa is going to find this project to be very interesting.
Yeah, well, let's. I sent you a DM a little bit earlier, so let's we'll communicate that way, and anyone else that you're in touch with here, and
also the Bankless podcast. I don't know how much access you have to that, but that's like the whole. That's a huge deal as well.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. I still got build my cloud up at Bankless, but I would like to set that up sometime in the near future when I have access to that. But we could definitely that's a goal. Yeah, that's definitely a goal. We gotta get you on the official podcast.
We set the bar high here, Jairus.
Yeah, I respect that. Yeah, I'm with that too. I'm a high achiever as well, so we gotta make that happen.
We love it. So, welcome to the Bean Farm, my friend.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Let's see. Any more discussions on the? Okay. Well, we're a little over the hour now. Happy to take a few more questions if anyone has them. Liz, I might give you one that is just. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the weather and about the kind of fine tuning it or exactly what happens. But in the last probably like 3 or 4 days, as we've been kind of above and below peg, I've just been wondering if it seems like the weather's gone up just a little bit. Sometimes I haven't been watching it that closely, but I wonder if you could just take us through, like, when the soil it's in kind of a soil scarce environment, like people are probably going to sow pretty soon. It seems like the weather is still creeping up from season to season, and I'm wondering, what the thought process is behind, if when it sort of flips the switch from going up by 3% to below 3%. Could you just guide us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So, in short, first let's just take a look at a little bit of the data, which I think is instructive. So, from our perspective, if you look at the weather, while the weather has generally continued to increase over the past week, I think the thing that we would kind of look at that has started to stabilize or decrease is the real rate of return. And so you're not going to have the weather decrease until the price is at or above $1. In general, but the fact that the real rate of return has kind of been steadily coming down over the past week, that's a good sign. So now that the prices hopefully going to oscillate more consistently over $1, the real rate of return continuing to come down, that will have to be a function of the weather coming down or the price being significantly above $1. But, it's more likely to oscillate above and below 1. So with that in mind, the weather coming down would be ultimately what results in a decrease in the weather over time. So there's, the short answer is, and it's not really a short answer because the peg maintenance model relies on a variety of factors. But if we just isolate the demand for soil, the question is, well, how does Beanstalk treat? So in short, just to summarize, Beanstalk increases or decreases the weather by 1 or 3% every season, or keeps it the same based on the time weighted average price over the previous season, the pod rate, and the change in demand for soil over the previous 2 seasons. And so if we look at, again, this is why it's not such a short answer, it's page 17 and 18 in the white paper. This kind of covers in detail how Beanstalk measures demand for soil. So specifically, the language that you're referring to, which is something that we reference pretty often, is in the bottom half of page 17, which says, however, when beans are sown in all or almost all soil in consecutive seasons, that variable, which is the rate of change in demand for soil, can inaccurately measure changing demand for soil. So, for example, let's say that in back-to-back seasons, there's around 100,000 soil, right? And or 1,000 soil, doesn't matter. And in both seasons, all 1,000 soil has beans sown into it. However, if in one season all of those beans were sown within a minute of the season starting, and in the next season it took 30 minutes of the season, that the goal is for Beanstalk to be able to look at that and realize that that's actually a decrease in demand for soil, because the previous season there was less time necessary to attract demand, if that makes sense. So there's that level of complexity in the model, which is that Beanstalk measures the time in addition to the amount of beans that were sown each season in order to more accurately measure demand for soil. However, and this is why it's not such a short answer, under the new soil policies, there's a couple of interesting complexities introduced here, because if you have alternating seasons where the price is above 1 and then below 1 in back-to-back seasons, you may have 10,000 soil one season and then 100 soil the next season. And so then it's like, well, how do you compare demand for 10,000 soil compared to demand for soil? And that's where more recently we have commented that the way that Beanstalk measures demand for soil can be overhauled or improved in its sophistication to account for the new soil mechanism, if that makes sense. But if anything, that's going to be like more of a fine tuning and less of like a real problem with the demand for soil mechanism, if that makes sense, or the way that Beanstalk measures it. And we would expect that the weather will start to come down to some extent if we continue to see excessive demand for soil.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I'm looking at this. It is a little bit more complicated than I had basically thought that if soil was being cleared out every season, then that would basically, and we were close to peg, that it would, like if we were oscillating above and below peg, that weather would go down. It sounds like there's a little bit more, there's more variables in it that I'll have to look over, but in general, that's interesting. I did post in the class discussion the relevant portion of the white paper and the graph, so people can take a look at that. But that the real rate of return graph is interesting, and so yeah. Anyway, thanks for diving into that a little bit.
Definitely.
I have a little bit of homework to do in going over some of these equations in the white paper. Does anyone else have any last questions? I think we can probably, if not, we can probably call it a wrap. Oh, we got Bean King. Okay. Well, Bean King, I think you took your hand down. I'm inviting you to speak. There you go. I sent you the invite, Bean King. There you are.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. First off, just apologies for my username. I know Publius are the two kings of Beanstalk.
Certainly not. Certainly not.
Nobody's a king.
I was just tempted to start singing like Lion King theme song, like as a troll. That was the only thing that went through my mind here.
Great. Well, I have a question. I wrote it down in one of the channels. It's essentially that, one of the big value adds that crypto has is that there's parts of protocols which are just totally immutable. For example, Bitcoin, there's 21 million, and it's not going to be changed. And that's kind of the meme that powers it, or one of the memes that powers it. So I'm curious from the perspective of Publius, what are the things that you see about Beanstalk as being candidates for just full immutability? And are there any that you have any intentions of making immutable? For example, like the 50-50 silo pod line split when new beans are created, or other characteristics of the protocol similar to that.
So, first, I would just say I really love this question. Like, this is exactly within the ethos of like our community. So awesome question. And your name actually betrays such a good question. With that said, I think before we answer like your substantive question as to what might be a candidate, we would just highlight a caveat, which is the diamond standard doesn't really facilitate this in a way that would be possible at the moment. And even if it were upgraded to support it, then that would require us to basically migrate to that contract most likely. So, I mean, it would be a total shit show. So while that's possible potentially in the future, like, highly unlikely, or at least highly unlikely to happen anytime in the near future. And if it did, it would be like a real overhaul to the structure of the code to support like making some of it mutable and some of it immutable. However, with that said, I do think that if not from like a ethos and mission statement and like community values perspective, everyone can make clear that certain things are immutable by our standard. I think that would probably similarly be in line with that ethos. And I'd maybe highlight that, there's a similar ethos to the fact that the 21 million supply guarantee is enforced by the miners that are continuing to run code that enforces that. There's a parallel there with stock owners continuing to vote for a version of Beanstalk that maintains those policies. So I would almost argue you don't need to put it explicitly into the smart contracts as long as you have sufficient incentives that enforce that in practice, if that makes sense. Now, to answer, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say you can kind of split this, I think, into two questions of, are there, of the parameters, is there some set that you would think that would be immutable or you think would be candidates? And then there's kind of the more technical, implementation level questions of when some of them might be voted to become immutable or something like that, or even if they could, or if our governance mechanism will just allow,
Yes. So I think I touched on the second one at least somewhat substantively. So to answer maybe the former question now, as to what might be a candidate to become immutable, I think the 50-50 payment to silo and field, that is a core part of the protocol and ensures the alignment of stockholders and pod holders, and that doesn't need to change ever, most likely. It's very hard to imagine a scenario where that would make sense to change. Certainly at this point in time. So that would probably be one. I think similarly, it's a really bad look to mint pods anywhere but the back of the pod line. To compromise the integrity of the first in, first out schedule would be catastrophic to people's faith in the model. Like, why lend at the end of the system if you can like kind of wrangle the system into lending you somewhere else in the pod line? So we would never support that. That would kind of be like capitulation and a total sacrificing of the integrity of the model. Beyond that, and I'm literally scrolling through the white paper here. I mean, it's hard to imagine the voting period, or at least the like we would want to enforce some sort of like 50% quorum and a 2/3 supermajority to pass things before the week-long or 168 season BIP time. So there are like certain things from a governance perspective you might want to enforce. I think, I think that's probably it for now off the top of my head. That would be a candidate, for something that we would say we would never want to change under any circumstances. Like, a lot of the system, to be honest, is like Beanstalk measuring the market and then responding to it. So both the measurements and the responses can be improved and tweaked and improved in efficiency in various ways. So we don't, like, it would be very foolish of us, in our opinion, to claim like the current model is the most efficient that it could ever become, and therefore we'd be more inclined to have like a really robust community review process to incorporate those types of changes, as opposed to like banning them altogether.
Awesome. That was a really helpful answer that helped clarify it a lot. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bean King. All right. Well, I think that will probably do. It was a great class, everyone. Wanted to throw a couple of reminders out there. Come to the DAO meeting on Thursday. Before that, an hour and a half before that, that's at 8:30 Eastern. And an hour and a half before that, we have the Twitter Spaces. So we'd love to see some people there. That's going to be Hype Bay, IPO and Chill, JWW, and I. And then other than that, you can look for a updated job board. We're going to have a job board with a lot of open positions that we're trying to have out by Thursday. So we'll announce that at the DAO meeting, but you can look for that and a lot of other great stuff in the works. Publius, anything else you want to say?
I think that's it for class. Thank you guys for coming, and love these types of questions. I mean, it really does just speak to the quality of the community that this is the type of discussion going on. So thank you guys for being so great and curious and thoughtful.